Good morning on this Sunday, October 24th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Atlanta crime takes center stage under the Gold Dome as early voting continues in the mayoral race. The U.S. Senate race heats up on the Republican side. Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black goes after Herschel Walker on immigration. And the feds will soon decide whether rockets can be launched off the coast of Georgia. Phil, Theron, Martha, and Bobby are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Another hearing focused on crime under the Gold Dome. Atlanta Police Chief Rodney Bryant says the violent crime trend is improving, and so is the recruitment of officers.
Our attrition has stabilized, and so we're not seeing officers leave at the same rate that we did last year. I saw the briefing from Chicago, and they are still having that problem with attrition. We're not in the city of Atlanta.
The Atlanta Police Department is authorized to have more than 2,000 officers on the force. It currently has just over 1,700, including 85 new recruits. According to the chief, back in May, murders were up 63% over the previous year. Now they're up just 15%, a significant decrease. Chief Bryant says they continue to work on the issue of repeat offenders. Senator John Albers urged leaders to address part of that problem by allowing Fulton County to use the city jail to help deal with overcrowding.
Get that jail turned over and get it done now. We don't need bureaucracy, we don't need politics, and we don't need a longer amount of time. We can solve a problem today.
Now, Mayor Bottoms is pushing to turn a part of the Atlanta City Jail into a proposed center for diversion and services, which would provide services and medical care to folks who would otherwise be arrested and locked up. And Theron, we're talking about people at risk for being arrested for low-level crimes.
Yeah, there's a huge conversation going on in the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, and now at the state. I mean, you just heard Senator Albers sort of make his plea to why he thinks that the city of Atlanta should partner with Fulton County to help, I think, roughly about 500 inmates who are there be temporarily housed at the Atlanta Detention Center. But ultimately, I think that the mayor's vision around creating this new sort of atmosphere at the city jail turned into a diversion center actually has a lot of support, Lori. You may have seen some of the television ads that have been running. I've been privy to some polling that shows that the majority of the people in the city of Atlanta think that there should be a phased approach to reimagine the jail and turn it into this diversion center that the mayor is proposing. And then lastly, on Chief Bryant, one of the things that he also talked about, Lori, was that morale is up at the APD, and also he talked about how the collaboration between the state and the county has actually been one of the reasons why we've seen the decline in crime in the city of Atlanta.
Phil, obviously crime is one of the major issues in the Atlanta mayor's race, and one of the issues you wanted to talk about was former Mayor Reed's plan on amnesty for some individuals.
That's right, Lori. And just to make a comment on the state Senate hearings, I think those were useful. And one of my big takeaways was the fact that Senator Albers said there are all too many permissive judges that are releasing people without any signature bond, and these include rapists and murderers. And he said, we want the names of these judges. He told that to Chief Judge Brasher. Well, let's release that now to the public. That's terrible. But secondly, to your point about mayoral candidate Reed, this is incredible, and I can't believe he even said this. He told a crowd of cheering people the other day that he wants to amnesty everybody for low-level crimes except DUIs. So he says, go into City Hall, go into the courthouse, we're going to take care, we're going to wipe out on your record all of these arrest charges. And that includes, get this, street racing, that includes running red lights, etc., etc. This is outrageous. A 100-day amnesty, and he wants to say he's fighting crime. I can just hear all of the thugs and gangbangers applauding him.
Well, Bobby, we've talked about former Mayor Reed receiving the endorsements from the police and the firefighter unions, but this week, in an unusual move, the head of Atlanta's NAACP, Richard Rose, wrote a scathing statement about Reed's candidacy. Were you surprised to see that?
Yes and no. I think it's important to take a temperature of where the race is right now. You've got, appears to have Felicia Moore starting to secure herself as potentially one of the people that could be going to this runoff. And then the question now remains, will it be Kasim Reed potentially or somebody else? And so everybody's starting to weigh in now on those decisions while there's still time to do that. So far, voter turnout has been very, very low in this race as far as early ballot returns, et cetera, and the early voting. So what they are pushing towards is this last couple weeks to make sure that everybody who's trying to absorb all these commercials, all this information, trying to figure out who they want. And that's why you see people like Kasim Reed attacking Felicia Moore's record and vice versa. And then you have people like Andre Dickens, Councilmember Dickens, who's trying to sneak up the back, not get talked about too much, continue to increase his positive ID and see if he can slip into one of those two spots. It's going to be an interesting couple weeks.
Martha, Bobby mentioned something I think is also very interesting is the low voter turnout for this early voting. I think when I checked, it was really not even reaching double digits. Does that surprise you considering all of the attention on Atlanta and the crime issue?
Well, we're seeing this across the region in municipal elections. The turnout is much lower than what it is what it had been at the same time 2 years and 4 years ago. Now, you got to make sure you're looking at apples to apples, but I've been watching not only Atlanta, but municipal elections throughout Northeast Georgia. So, yeah, I think it's an issue. I think people are exhausted. I think that it's been hard to get the attention of people on these municipal races, even though we feel like everybody's talking about the Atlanta mayor's race or the Gainesville mayor's race or whatever it happens to be. It's been hard for people to get the attention of voters. And I think with all the other controversy we've had throughout the year, that it kind of snuck up on some people. But on the reimagining, just real quickly, the reimagining law enforcement kind of thing, that theme there, you know, with the census in a lot of the jails getting very low because of COVID, this is an opportunity for law enforcement to really look at how they do things, but giving a blanket amnesty is not the answer.
Darren, I'll let you weigh in on all of that, but I also want to ask you, former Mayor Shirley Franklin weighed in on her pick. She endorsed City Councilman Andre Dickens. You ran campaigns for Atlanta Mayor. Do these endorsements matter?
Well, they do. And, you know, he also picked up not only the endorsement of former Mayor Shirley Franklin, he being Andre Dickens, he also picked up the endorsement of City Councilwoman Jennifer Ide, who's not running for re-election, but she represents District 6. And he also picked up the endorsement of State Senator Nan Ornrock. So I think what you're going to start to see, Lori, in this mayoral race is a lot more endorsements coming. People are going to look at the demographics of the city and figure out who do you roll out at what particular time to help you get to basically the runoff. But I want to compliment Bobby on something he said last week and to comment on Martha. There is voter apathy out there, guys, and the numbers reflect that. And so I just want to encourage everyone who watches this show to just go and vote. I mean, again, you know, don't let all the negative ads and all the things that you may not like about the candidates sort of deter you from voting. But if these numbers stay the way they are and we don't see the numbers increase significantly, and we're going to have a very unpredictable turnout, and we're going to probably have a big surprise not only in the mayor's races but some of these council races too if the turnout doesn't increase.
Bobby, you've got both hands up before I go to Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted to dovetail off of what Darren was talking about. We touched on it last week briefly about this kind of voter apathy thing. It's something that we're not only seeing here in Georgia, but we're seeing it nationwide. There's a Virginia governor's race that's going to be happening here in November where Terry McAuliffe, former DNC chair, former Virginia governor, is running against a Republican there. I mean, this is a race that should be a 6 to 10 point Democratic win. And right now, because of the fears of the lack of Democrats turning out without Trump on the ballot, it is causing some serious alarm signals and alarm bells inside Democratic campaign headquarters. We're seeing the same thing in races we're running in Florida right now. The voter apathy is really high. I will be curious to see if it will close higher, if we'll get a push at the end here because perhaps people are more comfortable with where COVID is in society and they kind of understand what they need to do to go out and vote at the polls. But boy, I am watching those races extremely closely as well because they are going to be bellwethers potentially for what could be coming in 2022 if Democrats don't get their act together.
And Phil, if we have a low turnout, I mean, these polls really won't mean much.
Well, you're right, although Theron and I were discussing last week what is key in every election, and that is targeting your base and getting them out, whether it's the Atlanta mayoral election or whether it's a Democrat versus Republican thing coming up. And so I see apathy too, but I also see it because people are disgusted with the way the country is going. I mean, you're looking at everything from rising inflation to gas prices going up, grocery prices going up. And of course, I've mentioned this, and Bobby is kind of reinforcing what I'm saying. There's a huge backlash against Biden and the Democrats that keep echoing some of these reckless policies. So with regard, though, to Atlanta's mayoral election, I think you'll see the undecideds break. Yes, it's early voting going on now, but I think by November 2nd, you're going to see a runoff.
Surprisingly, still a lot of undecideds out there. All right, thanks everybody. Coming up, the fight for the U.S. Senate race on the Republican side focuses on immigration. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
This week, Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black launched a radio ad saying his fellow Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, supports amnesty for illegal immigrants. Martha, we've seen this is an issue where Republicans are split.
Well, no doubt about it, and I think that you got to give Gary Black credit. He's trying to keep his name in the game because Herschel is kind of sucking up all the air in the room. He's getting all the coverage, and he's certainly polling the best. But I'm glad to see Gary continuing to put his ads out there and campaigning around the state. But I got to tell you, Herschel made a very big statement a couple of days ago. He did an interview with Brian Kilmeade where he was asked about this statement that President Trump made about not going out to vote in 2022 and 2024 if election integrity issues aren't met. And he said very unequivocally that's not the right message, that people need to get out to vote, and that he appreciates the president's endorsement, but he's Herschel Walker and he's going to run it the way Herschel Walker does it. And I think that was a big step for him and a very important statement.
Bobby, I think it's a statement that needs to be said for all Republican candidates.
I'm fine with it not being said personally, because go on and stay home. Give us the opportunity to hold the Senate seat, please. Theron has said it multiple times.
Spoken like a true consultant.
And Democrat.
Well, Theron has said it many times before on this show that, Donald Trump has been on a mission to destroy the Georgia Republican Party, and he's dead on with that assessment. I think it's interesting, the Gary Black ads. I'm curious to see how the electorate responds to Herschel Walker on the Republican primary side versus how they responded to Donald Trump, because you recall 4 years ago, Jeb Bush and everybody else tried to hit Donald Trump for not being conservative enough. And his cult of personality just won the day in that primary. I don't know where that stands in the GOP here for Herschel Walker, but it's interesting to see that, you got to try the attack, I guess, if you're Gary Black. But I don't know how much water that actually carries after a Donald Trump win in a Republican primary several years ago.
Phil, I know you want to respond, but I also want to ask you that this week the Republican National Committee opened what it calls a Black American Engagement Center in College Park. Let's talk about the strategy here also.
Well, the strategy is the Republican Party is a big tent party, and so naturally, in fact, Theron and Bobby won't like this, but Trump got the most Black and Latino votes of any Republican presidential candidate ever, and so the outreach is working. But going back to the issue of illegal immigration, I actually am happy that the Republicans are talking about it, because the Democrats don't want to talk about their open borders policy. It's outrageous that we'll have, over 1 million people pouring through our borders this year if the Biden policy continues and we're not deporting people. We don't know who they are. It's a huge national security threat, let alone the fact that cheap labor drives down the wages of American workers. So I'm glad that Herschel Walker and Gary Black and all the Republicans are talking about it. We need to do what we can here in the state too, and so let the discussion continue.
Theron, is this a difficult discussion for Democrats considering what's happening along the border?
Listen, I've said this before. I think what's going on at our border, it's not good. I'm not going to go as extreme as Phil and say it's a crisis, but it's definitely not a situation that we should be proud of. I mean, we definitely need to make sure that we don't see those horrific photos, and we don't, give these folks who want to come to the U.S. legally, we need to find a way to legally give them a pathway to citizenship. But back to this Black Engagement Center, Lori, this is one of the things that I have to think about our colleague Janelle King, because she was on the show. She definitely would be able to explain this. But I just ultimately think that this is a failed strategy for Republicans, because while they're trying to engage more Black voters, it's just that, number one, they don't elect more Black people to the Republican Party, and two, they're going to find a way to have some issue that they're going to take a strong stance on that's going to discriminate specifically the African American community. And so ultimately, I think this is just a failed strategy. But Democrats, we need to be, again, mindful that they are making an attempt to try to communicate with Black voters, and we need to make sure that we maintain that strong voter base within the Democratic Party.
Phil, go ahead. You've got your hand up. And I will say, I did see Janelle at the event, so she was there in College Park, Theron. Phil, go ahead, weigh in.
Well, I can't believe Theron is saying the Republican Party is going to find some way to discriminate against blacks. That's ridiculous. It's a slander. And I think that, as I said, there's outreach there. There's a message by the Republican Party, whether it's economic or national security or whatever, that resonates with people regardless of color. And to take that cheap shot is terrible.
Martha, you've had your hand up.
Well, I mean, look, it is an engagement that's working, and I think what's positive about it is that it is showing that Republican activism has to happen throughout the election cycle, not just at election times. And really, if you look at the candidates that are running this year across the country, it's the most diverse group of Republican candidates Republicans have ever seen. It is working because Republican ideas work. But I would argue, we had the passing of Colin Powell this week. He was appointed to most of the positions he had by Republican presidents, and was the face of America going forward, the first Secretary of State that was African American, and he was our face of our policy. So, I think Republicans have a great record to stand on. We just need to talk about it more.
Theron, I'll give you 20 seconds because we're out of time.
No, I think my pushback was when Phil says that the Republican Party is a big tent party, and that's just not true. And the Democratic Party is a big tent party. I mean, look at all the different ethnic groups and all the issues that we embrace. But ultimately, while Martha does make a good point about Colin Powell, and I also give you all Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, my message was you guys are not electing African Americans to the Republican Party. And also, there have been some issues that the Republicans, not all, but most, have taken a stance on that specifically bothers African Americans. And the voting turnout within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party shows that we do a better job of actually talking to African American voters and specifically showing up and voting and putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to the issues that matter to us the most. So that's the big difference between the two parties.
Phil, I know you're shaking your head, but I'm completely out of time. Coming up, will the federal government give the okay to rocket launches off the coast of Georgia? We'll discuss.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The FAA set a deadline of November 3rd to decide whether Spaceport Camden will launch or be aborted. Now, if approved, private companies could launch satellites and rockets from the 12,000-acre site, but some environmentalists around Cumberland Island don't like the idea at all. Bobby, your thoughts?
It's interesting. I think as Americans, we all like to see people pushing to the final frontier and going to space, and whatever you think of Jeff Bezos and William Shatner and the space trip that they just took up there. It's certainly intriguing always to go to the final frontier. On the other hand, you do balance with the fact that, well, if you live in that area, would you want rockets being launched off in your area? Would you want potential jet fuel leaks into your water, et cetera? So, I don't know. I don't really know where I come down on that. Thankfully, it's not that close to me, so I don't have to worry about it.
Well, Martha, we haven't heard much about this whole topic. What do you think the chances are?
Well, I visited there a number of times when I worked for Senator Perdue, and I am all in favor of this project because this was what was going to be a part of a nuclear weapons storage silo, and then the Cold War ended, and so they were able to come up with a different way of approaching this, and I'm all for this. I think this is a great thing for science. It's a great thing for what we're going to find out going forward, and it's the future. We have to look towards that.
Theron, weigh in here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think ultimately I agree with Martha. I mean, it's something that we got to be prepared for. Innovation is something that we all want to have. But I think that you got to also take these environmental groups very seriously as well, because they are very passionate about the issues that they care about. But ultimately, look, we have to just wait and see how it all turns out.
And Phil, last word on this topic.
Well, I think it's a great project, and I hope the FAA gives its stamp of approval. They've limited to small launch vehicles, number one, and number two, the environmental impact statement has been okayed. Now, there's always some radicals that are never going to be happy, but I hope it moves forward.
Well, this week, students at Atlanta's historically black colleges and universities took to the streets to protest for better housing and more funding for student loans. Theron, I know this is an issue near and dear to you. Many of the dorms on these campuses are just in dire need of repair.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not only a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, but also I'm a board of trustee member as well. And so, you know, I want to applaud these young people. You know, I come from the John Lewis School of Politics, Lori. I believe in peaceful protests, and that's what we saw this week. And look, the students definitely had some good points. But what I was most proud of, Lori, is that the college presidents over at the Atlanta University Center and their staff and faculty, they allowed the students to be heard. And look, I agree. I mean, there's ways for us to get private funding or federal assistance or state assistance to improve the dormitories, then we should look to do that. And ultimately, when parents send their kids to school, they want to make sure that they actually have a really good dormitory to live in. And so this is a conversation that is going to be ongoing. I remember, Lori, when I was at Clark Atlanta University, we were protesting about having better student housing. So this is something that has been happening for a long time. But ultimately, I think we'll find a solution that makes the students happy, but also make the parents feel like their students are getting the best care they can get at the university.
And time for one more topic. Stacey Abrams has not announced whether she'll make a run for governor, but her group Fair Fight is focused on Medicaid expansion, launching ads this week in Georgia. Bobby, if she runs, this will no doubt be one of her main issues like it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, and as it should be, we are just giving away Georgia taxpayers' money to the federal government to then split out to other states who are expanding Medicaid. This has been taken care of at the federal level. They've said, go on, expand Medicaid, states that want to do it. And the fact that we're not taking it, we're literally lighting our own money on fire. I'm surprised conservatives don't see it that way.
Martha, I know you want to weigh in. Why the hesitancy by the GOP to expand Medicaid? Because in the red states where it was expanded, they're able to draw down a lot of federal dollars to help places like rural hospitals.
Well, we actually had a plan in place that had gotten a waiver from Medicare and Medicaid to be able to put in place this July that would have offered these kinds of programs and monies to cover those kinds of folks, to more or less expand Medicaid, but through private insurance. But the Biden administration, one of the first things they did was waived the waiver so that we couldn't go forward with it. Certainly, healthcare is a number one issue that people are concerned about when they think about their day-to-day life, and so we've got to deal with it. Rural hospitals, of course, are taking a hit, but I believe that the plan that the governor wanted to put forward was the one that was going to bridge that gap.
But Theron, with no plan in place right now, then is it time for Republicans to perhaps look at expanding Medicaid?
Well, there's been a couple opportunities where some Republicans in the state of Georgia have signaled that they may be open to talks about it. You got to remember, Lori, back, I think 2 years ago, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce ushered a study and looked at sort of a financial pathway to seeing if we expanded Medicaid in Georgia, you know, what would be the financial impact. But I agree with Bobby. I think that Stacey Abrams and a lot of different groups that she's a part of and other groups have been fighting for a long time to expand Medicaid in Georgia.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, everyone, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
We got about 2 minutes and 30 seconds there, and I promise I'm starting with you this week since we couldn't get to you last week.
Thank you, Lori. My first winner is going to be the Council for Quality Growth at Michael Parish. They did a wonderful event called the Four Pillars event, honoring Ambassador Andrew Young. It was an outstanding event. Just want to give them a big shout out. And also I want to give a shout out to Stephen Modet. He's a caddy at East Lake Golf Club, and he walked with me for 18 holes. And Phil, I realized that golf is definitely not my full-time job, but we had a good time out there, had a good round. And then lastly, I want to give a big shout out to the Atlanta Black Chambers. I was able to work with the organization this week to moderate a mayoral debate where we had 9 candidates who were running for mayor, having a robust conversation about what would they do if they were elected mayor to help black businesses in the city of Atlanta succeed. So definitely want to make them a winner as well.
Phil, over to you.
Well, I think Theron would probably agree with me and every panelist with regard to hopefully winners, ultimately the Atlanta Braves and, of course, the University of Georgia. Also, we like to talk occasionally about some good economic news, and I was over there at the Battery where Truist Park is, and TK Elevator is a company. It's a $200 million investment. They've got 3 buildings. They build and research elevators, and right up to that glass tower at the top. It's a great view up top there.
All right, Martha, over to you.
Well, I tell you, of course, the Braves, I'm hoping one way or another, we are going to be saying go Braves for a long time. My loser this week is the Democrats in the Congress. They just can't take a win on that infrastructure bill. And I know that I've said it before, but it seems like instead of moving on to the things that can't pass, they ought to pass the things that can pass. And then, of course, my winner this week is Colin Powell. I wrote a letter to him when I was a young mother about my concern about the Gulf War. And I was just a mom taking care of my kids, and he wrote me back, and I will always remember that.
All right, Bobby, take it out. I got 30 seconds.
Wow, what an amazing story about Colin Powell there. Thanks for sharing that, Martha. Look, I just want to take a moment and shout out the winners of the folks who are participating in the American Cancer Society walk this weekend. It's the first time they've been able to do this in a year because of what happened with COVID. So thanks to all the survivors and volunteers out there.
All right, thanks everybody. And thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.